Hi, my name is Sara Rosenthal, and I am a 2012 graduate of West Windsor-Plainsboro High School North, and I am an eating disorder survivor. I was so kindly asked by Miss Aishi Jane to speak about my story as a contribution to her amazing project called Imperfectly Perfect that she is completing right now. For those of you who haven't heard it, it is a collection of resources, people telling their personal anecdotes, and just extraordinary stories and places to find help for those people who are seeking aid and awareness in relation to eating disorders. So if you haven't checked that out, please go to imperfectlyperfectbodyimage.weebly.com and check that out because it is just wonderful. Anyway, so my story really begins, I would say, the fall of my senior year. So this was 2011. And, back in high school, I was a very athletic person. I was pretty good at school, I would say. And I was a perfectionist. I've always been a perfectionist, even from a very young age. I liked being able to establish control over things and having a sense that I had done a good job. And so in the fall of my senior year, I was playing volleyball, and during one of our big matches that was qualifying us for the playoffs that year, I tore my ACL. That was devastating for me because I just loved playing volleyball. It was just a wonderful outlet for me. But all of a sudden, that kind of came crashing down. And, so I had to kind of sit on the sidelines, and that was a big emotional blow for me. But that's okay. I loved being there for my team and whatnot. But suddenly, for really one of the first times in my life, I was very sedentary. Before volleyball, I had done softball for years. I did taekwondo for several years. I was, not very good at sitting, and so this was a big issue for me. But anyway, so I was kind of sedentary, and I was really just didn't have that outlet anymore. So I was just kind of stuck with my thoughts, and so I, um, I sat there and I started gaining a little weight. I started getting a little, anxious. I started really taking in the things around me. I started, seeing little problems that weren't necessarily my things to fix in relation to those around me, but I would feel guilty that I couldn't fix them, no, especially now that I have all of this time to do so. And so I, was really floundering. Fast forward several months, I'm recovering from my surgery, I'm off crutches, and I've just kind of absorbed all the problems of those around me, and I need to find control. And as a part of recovering from an injury, you have to go through physical therapy, and part of that was, working out my knee. And I would go to the gym, and I would be like, okay, I'm doing this to better my joint and whatnot. And then slowly I started to see I was losing weight, and I suddenly had some control again. And so I would go, and I was go and go and go, and I started losing weight. I downloaded this app called MyFitnessPal, and this is not anything against MyFitnessPal. It's really just can be an excellent resource for those people who really, need something to help them track. But so I noticed that, along with that, you can count your calories. And I said, oh, there's more control. And so I started, okay, I'm this weight, I'm this height, this is how many calories I should have per day. It was started off as a healthy thing. Gradually and more gradually, it turned into something a lot less healthy than that. The stronger a hold I had on it, the more pounds I lost. It was like a little victory. Every pound, every ounce was a little victory in my head. I had control. I was fixing a problem, so to speak. And so I guess I started off at about 165 pounds, and by the time I started college, I was down to about 125. So in less than a year's time, I'd lost 40 pounds. I'd gained this irritation with those around me, people who I'd never really fought with before. One of my best friends, I started really picking at people. I would say things that I had never said before. I remember looking at my mom once and being like, if my brother keeps eating like that, he's not going to be skinny. And her looking at me just horrified, not recognizing who was speaking to her. And so I would weigh myself every day. By the time I got to college, I would have, these manic episodes. I would isolate myself. I would weigh myself constantly, would be writing everything down. I was obsessed with figuring out what I was going to be eating next, to the point that I couldn't really think about anything else. I had to go to the gym, at 7:30 in the morning every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or else. I didn't know what, would happen, but I had to be there. And it got so bad to the point that, my mom came to me and said, something's going on. And at that point I had just, I'd isolated myself so much, and I was like, okay, let's go talk to a physician. And so I did, and that day I was diagnosed with eating disorder, not otherwise specified. It was kind of interesting. I was 1 pound over being officially anorexic. I was like, well, look at that. But so I was told by my doctor that day that if there wasn't a turnaround, that I would have to drop out of school and be admitted into an inpatient program for young adults suffering from eating disorders. And that was my world crashing down on me, because above all things, I had said before that I was pretty good at school, and school was my thing that I was always good at, and that was something I always really had some sort of control over. And in my head, if I didn't have my school, if I wasn't able to prove that I was, worth it and worthy to myself through my academics, then I had nothing. And it really put me into a bit of a tailspin. It was tough. I felt like I went back to school, like I knew what I had to do, but I just couldn't. I didn't know why I couldn't. The calories that I was eating per day kept dropping, and I felt like I was becoming my own worst enemy. I felt like I had one part of my brain saying, Sarah, you really need to get yourself together if you are going to be able to stay in school. And the other part of me, almost, like an angel and a devil on your shoulder, saying, but if you do this, you'll not have any control. You're going to be worthless if you give into this. What kind of person are you? You're going to be so ugly. You're going to be so fat. Nobody will like you. You'll never have a boyfriend. Yada, yada, yada. And so luckily I sought the help of a therapist, and I really can't say how thankful I am that, my family had the resources, like medical insurance, to be able to send me to a therapist. And so I started seeing her once a week. And I just would sit there and talk. And it was awkward at first, telling somebody about all of your day-to-day issues. At first it just started talking about my day and whatnot, and I would ask her a few questions about herself. And over time, I would start kind of speaking about things that were bugging me, that I didn't even realize on the surface were bugging me, things that had bugged me my whole life, that had kind of just, I had buried down. And after speaking with, my adult physician that I wound up getting down there, it turned out that I had depression and anxiety, which I think there were signs of my whole life. And so I was put on medication. I went through several medications. to kind of balance me out. And it was a really tough time. My medications weren't taking. I had to drop a class in school, and I really just felt like I was knocked down another peg there. I didn't know what I was going to do. And it was, there were so many things working against me at that point. I had to drop a class, but then I got a boyfriend that time, and which to me, equated to, wow, you're in this anorexic state, but you are attractive to somebody. It was my first serious boyfriend, and so I got a lot of conflicting messages from everything that was around me, and it was really horribly difficult. But I stayed consistent with talking to the therapist. We continued to play with different medicines, to see what could kind of cause me to take a breath finally. And I also started reading this book called Life Without Ed by Jenny Schaefer, which is a magnificent book. And it really it personified what I was talking about before, those two sides of your brain. I was talking about the angel and the devil. It had, your normal self on one side, your true self, the person in me saying, this is crazy, you've lost all this weight, this is not healthy. And the other side that was saying, you're worthless if you don't do this. And Jenny Schaefer in that book calls that other side Ed, for eating disorder, Ed. And it was like a light bulb went off. For the first time, I didn't feel alone anymore, and I didn't even realize how alone I was feeling. I felt crazy, sitting there thinking I had another voice in my head, because it does sound crazy. And I, for the first time, kind of had some hope that maybe this wasn't a permanent state for me. And so I knew that if I was ever going to beat this, I was the person in charge. Nobody can really sit there and, force this mental illness out of my body. It's not a demon. It's not something, that can be taken out with an exorcism. It was all in my head. It's very real, but because it is all in my head, I am the chief person who needs to work on getting it out. And so, as much as I was working against myself at the time, that true self, this side that I was talking about before, finally felt a little bigger that day, a little taller, a little more empowered. And I really, I got my mom involved, I got my family involved, and got my doctor, we started talking about different medicines, how different things interact with each other, what I needed to do sincerely in order to survive. It was at the point where if I didn't start beating this, I was going to die. And so we all banded together to do that. And at kind of the peak of this, I started, I started gaining a little bit of weight, and it seemed good. And then following, there were some really poignant experiences that helped me in this. First, I'm a big writer, and when I was going through these manic phases, I really felt like I was in some sort of mania. I mentioned before, but there would be times at night where I would restrict all day, and then would feel compelled. I would have no control over my body, and I would go and I would just eat. Sometimes it was a whole jar of peanut butter, and like a whole Jif jar of peanut butter. It's crazy to think of now, and I felt like I had no control over doing that. But I would go and binge that. And So when I was in those states of mania, I don't know how it occurred to me, but I was always a writer and I would write these things down. And so as an outlet for me, I started a blog called Promote Positive Body Image. It's on WordPress. It's srosenthal3.wordpress.com if anybody's interested. I can't say that I've posted on it in a long time, but I started letting that out. And it was really just for me, but suddenly I had all of this outpouring of people saying, wow, I had no idea. I mean, especially because it was in college, nobody knew me as a 40-pound heavier Sarah. They just, thought I was a skinny person. I had such an outpouring of people who had met me just in school, of people who I'd grown up with saying, wow, I had no idea. Like, this is incredible for you to share. Is there anything I can do? Things along those lines. And so that was a really good first step. Second, I had the opportunity, once I kind of like proved to myself that, like my sane self started growing a little taller, as I said, I got to study abroad in Costa Rica, and of the amazing things, are innumerable that I experienced and saw there. Something I found really poignant was the perception of beauty. I remember I lived with a family, and my little host brother talked about his aunt, and he called her gordice, I think, and that, translates to like fat woman. And I was like taken aback by that at the time, but it was just like, no, that was such a term of endearment, and that's not an insult. That was not an insult to him. And kind of being out of my usual perception of beauty, of, skinny is beautiful, it really had an impact on me. Following, that trip, I, came back. I, found myself getting stronger every day. I finally settled upon a medicine that, kept me even. I surrounded myself with really only people who could help me. We had like symbiotic relationships, as opposed to people who were just taking. And yeah, I'm it's incredible to sit here right now, because it was about 6 years ago that I was at my worst. And to think where I am now, I can't believe it. First of all, that I'm still alive, having gone through all that, and then second of all, just as a result of that, my life isn't what I had planned for it to be, but it's better. I am never gonna regret having an eating disorder. It's not a pleasant thing. It's not like I recommend it, but it made me a stronger person. It made me a more empathetic person towards others who are handling their own mental health issues. It's certainly one of those situations where you don't know until you know, and so I almost felt like part of a special club, being that I experienced that. But for those of you out there who are dealing with dealing with another mental health issue, know that you're not alone. Know that there are resources out there. Reach out to help empower yourself to be that chief person, to help uplift you and help you really, take yourself out. You can beat this. And with extraordinary resources, I mean, really, just like Ayushi's site, Imperfectly Perfect, it's a wonderful starting point for you to find the help that you need. Thank you to Ayushi for letting me share my story. I'm sorry if it was a little all over the place. It was a while ago to reminisce about, but thank you again, and please check out Ayushi's project, Imperfectly Perfect.